Na-Yeon slowly woke up as her alarm kept on ringing. She just stared at the ceiling of her tent for a few moments as it rang, not really wanting to move. Eventually, she reached for it and shut it off as she sat up in her bed. She looked to her side and saw some food already placed by her makeshift bedside. Na-Yeon smiled because she knew who had done it and she appreciated the girl more so every day. She got out of her sleeping bag and proceeded to start eating as she thought over what had happened since they had escaped the city. It had been 4 months since then, 4 months since they had barely escaped the city with their lives. She could remember how happy she felt when she had seen the soldiers even after the shot at them. They had thought that this was happening all over the world and had just been aiming to get somewhere safer than a city, but they later found out from the soldiers that they had managed to contain it in their city before it could spread further. She also knew that it meant they had left them to die. At first it had made the group mad for a few months till they saw the selfishness they had to save themselves. They had thought the soldiers might kill them since that was what the soldiers on the roof had said back to them, but as the hours passed and more survivors had come out of the shadows and ruins of the city, the government had reluctantly decided not to kill them, especially as some people had managed to capture footage of what was happening with the survivors and leak it out to the rest of the world. The backlash must have been severe because she remembered a story of one of the generals killing himself because of this, and the army immediately moved from waiting on the edge of whether to kill them or spare them, but they had been something about some zombies hiding as people that went crazy and attacked people in the camp, and they immediately knew it was someone like Namra and Gwinnam. So because of that, none of them could immediately be sent into the city and as far away from this hell as possible. The army and people had decided that they would be kept inside the infected zone and a refuge built inside. Obviously, the survivors had been angry about being forced to stay inside her, and as the months passed, some of the survivors had been angered by the situation while others accepted it, because for others being under guns and guard was better than hiding like rats in the city to avoid being eaten. They were mothers and fathers without families and children without parents. The army had made sure to test all of them thoroughly to the point that it seemed like torture, and all of them held out while others were taken by the army and never seen again. The first time they had been allowed to talk with people on the outside, she had been so excited that she woke up early to be at the front of the line to use the computer to video call. They were still kept in an information blackout to avoid anything about the area or their situation leaking out to the public. After waiting a while for an hour or two super early in the morning, she was welcomed into the room where 2 guards stood at the ready with rifles in her, staring at her as she sat down on a single chair and desk centered in the room. The guards stood at each corner on the opposite side of the room with a large mirror that she now knew was a one-way window. They were watching her, they were watching everyone. She sat down on the computer and moments later she saw the call start. She knew they were monitoring whatever she said, but she wasn't planning on leaking anything. She just wanted to talk to her family. Her dad's face filled the screen with her mom sitting by his side, and she immediately began to cry. She saw her father crying as well, not even having said a word as he tried to reach for her through the screen. "Dad," she said between her cries. "Princess." She wanted more than anything to go home right then. She was so glad that her family had been traveling when this disaster had started and not been caught up in its craziness. Most people had not been that lucky. Na-Yeon could see her mother trying to hold on to her regal ways, but could also see the tears streaking down her face as she tried to face away. Even now she was trying to be regal, which caused a laugh to burst out her through her cries, because even if she hated it, she was happy for something so familiar. "How are you doing? Are they treating okay? Are you safe? How did you get out? Do you need me to get you out?" As her father rushed through questions, she had no doubt that he could get her out, but she wasn't going to leave the others just yet. "No, Dad, they are treating me okay, I'm okay. She said the last part trying to reassure herself and him at the same time. She started talking with her father for a while, telling him everything that had happened but leaving out Jae-young-soo and Cheong-san because she wasn't quite ready to tell him that. She didn't want him to hate her, not him, especially not him. "You have 10 minutes left," one of the guards shouted at her, breaking her out of her reverie. Na-Yeon nodded at the guard before facing her parents again. The whole time she had only talked to her father, and her mother had been sitting quietly gripping her father's hand, making sure not to meet her eyes. "Dad, can you let me speak to Mom?" she asked as she looked at her father. He understood immediately the reason why she asked and moved to stand. Her mom gripped her father's hand and stared at him as if trying to stop him from leaving, but he left nonetheless. Now it was just the two of them looking at each other. Well, one of them was, and the other was looking around nervously. "Mom, I've just been to hell and back. The least you could do for me is look at me." She could see her mom nervously rubbing her arm, still not making eye contact but glancing up once in a while. But her mother finally looked up and looked at her as if for the first time in a long time. "How are you?" her mother had asked, almost scared. "I'm fine," she replied nervously, and then they sat for a few minutes in uncomfortable silence. She knew that after all the problems that they had over the years, even a situation like this wouldn't bring them together immediately, but she saw how her mother was acting and it warmed her heart a little, because now she knew that she at least cared. "Listen, Mom, I have to go now, there are a lot of people waiting," Na-Yeon said as she went to sit up. "Na-Yeon, wait," her mother whispered a shout, and she heard it. She turned back to the screen and looked at her mother, who looked torn and for the first time the regal mask cracking. "I'm glad that you're okay, I'm happy," she said, and Na-Yeon could only smile a bit at the statement, even as her mother didn't meet her eyes. "I'm happy you are too," Na-Yeon said, and she could see the moment of shock that froze her mother's features as she stared at her before the call was cut. "Time to go, there are others in the line," a guard said as he ushered her outside. That soon became her weekly trick with the others. Each time her mother always kept quiet when she showed up for the calls, always seemingly uncomfortable. Na-Yeon and her father tried sometimes to make her not feel left out of their talks, but she barely replied or only supplied a few words. She could also see the uncomfortable air that was around her parents now when they sat together. She hoped that it didn't lead to what she thought might happen. Her relationship with her fellow group of survivors over the past few months had also not started off at the best. Even Onjo had distanced herself from her when she knew they were now both in relative safety, but she always hovered around some distance watching her. Onjo watched out for her in some capacity, rushing out to her tent when she screamed from her nightmares to wake her up. She preferred that rather than when the guards did, because it wasn't uncommon among the survivors in the camp. She remembered how being alone felt after only a few days of finally having people around her who wanted to help her, even if that was reluctantly. Na-Yeon missed Cheong-san more with each passing day. Whenever she thought of him, she was so happy that he had taken the chance on her, but she wished he had made it instead of her. She remembered the feeling of freedom that only lasted a few moments before it was replaced with that crushing loneliness, the void that had been filled the past few days. She didn't want to eat on some of those days as she remembered all that she had seen and all that had happened, but they were all forced by the soldiers for observation. Na-Yeon, looking back, was glad for that because it kept her body healthy, and for that, she was glad because of what she found out a month after being saved by the soldiers. It had all started out well. She didn't really know if it was all well. She didn't even notice when she missed her period only after the doctors doing the constant checkups had asked her about it. They had brushed it off as just her missing it because of the stressful situation and sent her back to her tent, and she very much did the same. Everything had been fine till just over a month after being saved from the city, and just over a week till her last checkup. She was standing in line in the morning to get food with the other survivors. She had seen Anjo waiting in line a few places back. They had only made eye contact and gave each other a nod before going into the line. It was small, but Na-Yeon was grateful for it because it was more than anyone else did. It was so sudden. One moment she was standing in line waiting to see what was the holdup, and the next she felt so sick that she momentarily felt herself lose her footing before she regained it. She felt herself wanting to vomit and immediately rushed out of line looking for somewhere she could get some relief. This didn't go unnoticed by the guards and more importantly by Anjo, who rushed after her. Na-Yeon couldn't get far and went behind a wall to relieve herself. Anjo arrived to see Na-Yeon reaching herself behind the wall and after a moment of hesitation rushed to help her. "Na-Yeon, are you okay? What's wrong?" she asked quickly, trying to find out what had been wrong. She had been watching over Na-Yeon, but she seemed okay even this morning. The guards arrived at the same time, rifles at the ready, and Anjo went in front of Na-Yeon, who was still reaching behind her. "What's going on here?" they asked. Anjo could already see the two guards tightly gripping their weapons ready to gun them down. She didn't want a misunderstanding. One had already happened when the guards accidentally shot someone they thought was sick with the zombie virus. "She's just feeling sick. I was going to take her to the doctor now." The guards were looking at her suspiciously and glancing behind her to see Na-Yeon, who had stopped vomiting behind her. "Seok-woo made sure they make it shoot them if they try anything," one of the soldiers said, who seemed to be the superior before he turned and left. So cautiously, Na-Yeon and Anjo walked to the doctor's office. Na-Yeon could feel Anjo's eyes roaming over her, trying to look for the cause that she didn't know herself. Anjo helped Na-Yeon along with the ever-looming presence of the soldier behind them. Normally they had to wait to see the doctor, but the soldiers quickly waved them through and moments later they found themselves in the room, and another soldier had joined the group. The doctor rushed out and quickly conducted many tests looking for the virus and other things. The two of them had waited anxiously in the waiting room with soldiers and weapons at the ready as they all awaited the results. The doctor returned with a small smile on her face. "It's okay, boys, she's not sick." The soldiers nodded at the doctor and left. "Then why was I vomiting my insides out there?" Na-Yeon asked. "Because she definitely was sick." "Oh, that's simple, dear. You're pregnant." The room went quiet as the words left the doctor's mouth. "That can't be possible. I never. I only did it a few times. Na-Yeon was trying to find the words because she had only ever done it with one person. "Cheong-san," she said in a whisper, and Anjo turned to face her confused. "What do you mean, Cheong-san?" she asked, confused because she knew they got close somehow during their whole escapade, but they didn't get that close, right? "I only slept with one person," Na-Yeon said nervously because she still didn't honestly know how Anjo felt about Cheong-san even after all this time. Not that they had any time to talk about it. She saw Anjo's face shift, confused as she let go of the grip on Na-Yeon's hand. But how?" That was easy for Na-Yeon to answer. "I thought I wasn't going to make it. We both thought we might not. And I wanted to share something special with him because he would risk his life to save me even after all I had done to him. I fell for him then. I just didn't know our time together would be so short." Anjo was just trying to process all of this, but it explained Cheong-san's behavior and how he always seemed so attached to her. She started pacing around as Na-Yeon was trying to sift through all of her thoughts, guilt, anger, and happiness, but more so was the feeling of sadness because Cheong-san wasn't going to know about this. That's what finally brought her to tears. As soon as Anjo heard her crying, she turned around. She hated how she felt right now because this was Na-Yeon and Cheong-san's baby and she had made it somehow about her. Anjo came and embraced her as cried. The doctor just watched them closely as Anjo tried her best to reassure her that everything was going to be fine. She walked up to the two confused. Apologies if this news has proved to be upsetting. We can take measures to deal with the situation if you would like. Na-Yeon's head immediately shot up. No. She said with a shout, momentarily startling the doctor and Anjo. A guard rushed in. Is everything okay, doctor? The doctor simply waved away the soldier. It's alright. The soldier lurked for a moment before closing the door and stepping out. It's okay, Na-Yeon, nothing is going to happen with your permission, okay? She said the last part questioningly, looking at the doctor. The doctor nodded, but she could still feel the glare on her from Na-Yeon as she already went to clutch protectively over her stomach. Nothing will happen except me allowing them to assign you more rations if you decided to keep the pregnancy. The decision was already clear in Na-Yeon's head. The last piece of Cheong-san, a part of her and him together, she sure as hell was not going to get rid of it, of her. Him, of her baby. I'm keeping it, she said decisively without any hesitation. She didn't even have a plan. She was alone here, but she wasn't going to give this up. Fantastic. Then I will write you up to receive more rations, and you must come here at least once a month or whenever you feel something is wrong. Anjo listened as the doctor spoke, but she could see that Na-Yeon's mind was a million miles away. So when the doctor finished talking and left, she had only spoken to Anjo till once again they were left in the room alone. You okay? Anjo asked nervously as she moved towards the girl, the one that was carrying a part of Cheong-san in her, the last part of her best friend. Her family. I'm fine, it's just a lot. A lot to think about. Anjo at least understood that much. Okay, let's get you to bed, so you can rest. I will go get some rations for you. Na-Yeon just nodded wordlessly. She didn't even remember how Anjo got her to her bed that day, only that she woke up the next day with Anjo sitting in her tent. I have to tell my parents, Na-Yeon said as she got up. She immediately felt sick and was surprised when Anjo handed her a bucket that was at the side of her bed because she didn't have that before. After a few painful minutes of spilling her guts out in the bucket with Anjo rubbing her back and spurting out reassurances, she finally managed to regain her composure. That was the beginning of Anjo becoming her shadow, always hovering around like a mother hen. Na-Yeon understood at first it was probably because of the baby in her stomach being Cheong-san's, but she was just happy for any company. With her always in close proximity, it allowed her for them to talk, not without resistance at first, as Na-Yeon's first attempt to get to know the other girl had been shut down. But after distancing themselves and Na-Yeon saying she would leave her alone, the other girl eventually relented, because if she couldn't see Na-Yeon, then she couldn't see the baby. With them now forced together, Anjo knew that she had to now talk with her more, and Cheong-san would never forgive her if she abandoned his baby. Then a few days later came a day Na-Yeon had been dreading, the day she told her parents. She tried to make all sorts of excuses for herself, but after a firm push from Anjo and Cheong-san's voice, she had gone inside. Their call started off normal, as they all did, with her dad going off on a tangent about what he had been up to. She was glad he had taken some time off because he looked more like his old self from her memories. Her mom just looked on nervously. Dad, Mom, I have something to tell you, she said quickly, stopping her dad's story about what he had done on the weekend. What is it, princess? Is everything okay? Her father asked in a low tone, his eyes already narrow as if ready to cut down anyone who messed with her. That power was a blessing and a curse. She remembered abusing it so much in the past. It's nothing bad, Dad. At least I think, depends on what you say. Na-Yeon took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Her dad just looked at her while her mom looked between his face and her face on the screen, and I'm going to keep it. That seemed to reawaken her father. "Who is he? What is his family's name? I swear when I find that boy I'm going to he's dead," she said, a bit choked, and her father's anger immediately deflated a lot. "He died getting me out," she said, and she had to shake away her tears because she had to get this out now. "I did something when we were in there that seemed to garner her parents' attention more." "What did you do, honey?" If she wasn't so broken about what she wanted to reveal, she would have voiced her surprise that her mother was the one who asked the question. Na-Yeon seemed to remember where she was as one of the guards shifted. They were listening to everything and everyone. She had no doubt that they would probably lock her up. All the survivors knew that the army always wanted to get rid of them. She also remembered that now she wasn't alone. How could she be so selfish? So she shook her, wiping the tears, and looked at her parents' faces marred with concern. "I will tell you some other time. But the important thing is, he forgave me, even protected me after everything I had done." Her parents just listened to her closely. "We were together for a while and one thing led to another and now I'm here without him." "Oh honey," her mother said. Na-Yeon furiously wiped her tears and then awaited her parents' answer. "Are you sure that you're ready? This is different from having a puppy," her father said with a small smile and laugh. "I'm ready, Dad. After everything that happened, I learned just how short life can be." She said the statement knowing she had seen people die and taken a life far too quickly herself. It still ate at her. The rest of their conversation proceeded as how the many others had, but this time her mother was interjecting more, trying to subtly ask questions about her and the baby. Na-Yeon could see out of the corner of her eye when her mother glanced down momentarily to her stomach. She was glad that they hadn't asked too much about Cheong-san, because when her father did, he had seen how she had frozen and her mother had quickly changed the topic. They could see how he still affected her. The timer rang. "I guess it's time to go," she said as she moved to get up. Na-Yeon, her mother quickly said, surprising both her and her father. "We will be coming to see you soon, so please take care of yourself," she said before getting up and moving out of shot, leaving her confused father and herself. After a few quiet moments and the interruption of a guard, she simply replied, "I will," before she turned and left. Things had progressed at a somewhat rapid pace since that day. Anjo had started sticking to her like glue at her beck and call. Na-Yeon wasn't going to take advantage of it. She already had seen what she did when someone had her best interest at her and she twisted it. She wouldn't repeat the same mistake. Na-Yeon had been worried about how she was going to connect with Anjo, but she had found the answer much simpler. Cheong-san. That was someone he wanted to know everything about, and she had known him her whole life. Anjo had been cagey at first, as if only trying to keep the memories to herself, but when she recognized that this was now the mother of Cheong-san's baby, she knew that the other girl should have a picture of who he was, and so began their talks. With more information she got about Cheong-san, the more she opened up to her parents about him. She could never really gauge what they all thought of him, especially her mother, since he wasn't from a prestigious family. Even when they had come to see her and were separated by a giant glass and armed soldiers, their fellow survivors had been confused about her new relationship with Anjo, because they saw her go from cold and distant and always attentive and there. Especially Soo-hyuk had noticed since Anjo had stopped hovering around him as if waiting for him to rebound from Namra. They had all got together to watch the two as they went about the day. "So what do you think is going on?" Dae-soo asked the rest of the party. "I don't know, it looked like Anjo had ditched her, but now we barely ever see her alone," Soo-hyuk said as he saw the two talking with some small smiles on their faces. Mi-jin was just eating her rations at the back of the group. "I mean, we can just ask them," she said, to which everyone in the group just stared at her. "What?" The group went back to staring and watching them as everyone else ate their food. The group had mostly gotten closer in the intervening time with them not really knowing anyone else in the camp. Seeing other survivors being taken only reinforced the bond between the group. The group watched the two for a few days till they managed to find Anjo alone. They think Na-Yeon was resting, which was weird since she did it so often during the day. Anjo Soo-hyuk said, catching up to her as she was about to go. Anjo turned expecting to see just Soo-hyuk but was surprised when she was met with the entire group. "Oh hi guys, it's been a while, how is everything going?" Anjo said, already suddenly nervous, and she could already see that they noticed. They all navigated through what was an awkward conversation on everything but what they really wanted to know, till finally Mi-jin just went up and asked what they had all been thinking. "What are you doing hanging around Na-Yeon?" Mi-jin asked, and they could see the momentary panic on her face before she shook it off. Anjo had already asked Na-Yeon about it if she wanted to tell the rest of the group. "I think it's better if she tells you because it's her news to tell. I'm just making a bigger effort now." She knew that some of the group, especially Dae-soo, still held resentment towards her for her murder. Mi-jin let out a sigh and turned to Na-Yeon's tent and headed straight for it. She was annoyed with every being so scared to talk with one another. She had already been told what Na-Yeon had done, and for a while, she was mad that they had made her help someone like that since she didn't really have any attachment to the girl she had just avoided her. Anjo rushed to stop her. "Don't disturb her, she's resting," but she was already late as Mi-jin stepped into the tent to find a sleeping Na-Yeon with trays of food next to her and better bedding than the others in the camp did. She had no doubt that the girl who she learned came from a prestigious family was somehow pulling strings to get better stuff. "Hey you, wake up!" Mi-jin shouted and went to shake the girl but was smacked away by Anjo. "Hey, what's the big deal?" Mi-jin said angrily at the girl smacking her arm away. Dae-soo rushed to get between the two as Anjo was also angry, standing ready to fight the other girl if she had to. "What's all the noise?" Na-Yeon asked, sleeping as she sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Anjo immediately rushed to her side. Hey, it's nothing, just go back to sleep." But as Na-Yeon opened her eyes to respond, she was surprised to find the whole group of survivors in her tent. "Oh hello," she said, her sleepy state finally leaving her. "What's everyone doing in my tent?" she asked, looking at Anjo at her side. Anjo just let out a sigh. "They want to know why we have been so close lately," she said, and Na-Yeon already understood what she was asking about. "Oh," Na-Yeon said as she looked at the group, but after a few weeks of having Anjo now looking after her, why was there such a sudden interest in her? "Why are you so interested in me now?" she said, with a small part of her trying to show the hurt she felt at being abandoned as soon as they got here. She knew she didn't deserve them, but it still hurt nonetheless. The group all looked around shyly except Dae-soo. "I know what I did was wrong and it wasn't long ago, but I wanted your forgiveness. I tried so hard to speak to any of you, but you always seemed to ignore me, but now you are suddenly interested in me." She sat up, swinging her legs next to the bed, and Anjo was already handing her a glass of water. She seemed to follow the doctor's words to the letter. Na-Yeon was great for the support because she didn't want to be alone in here, especially since they still didn't know when they were allowed to leave. She let out a sigh as she stood up. She knew she wasn't going to go back to sleep anytime soon anyway. "If you wanted to know so bad, you could have just asked me. Do you think I didn't notice you guys watching us all the time?" No one responded, and she wanted to grill them more, but she also knew that she had to go easy on herself and the baby. She had already told Anjo it wasn't going to be a secret, in case she wanted to know so much. "I'm pregnant," she said as she went to sit on her bed again. "What?" the group exclaimed. Who would ever die? Soo was about to ask sarcastically before he felt her glare on him. It's Cheong-san's that seemed to shock the group even more as Soo-hyuk even had to sit down. You and Cheong-san? How long have you been seeing each other? Soo-hyuk asked. That's no one's business, Onjo said with an edge to her voice, and Soo-hyuk just thought to not ask. That had been the first day on Na-Yeon's trek to a form of redemption. At first the group had distanced themselves for a day or two, but slowly one by one they started to try and make an effort to talk to her with some encouragement from Onjo. During this time, whenever Onjo wasn't looking after Na-Yeon, she always looked out over the wall to the school. It was a far distance out, but she could just glance at it, especially when she got binoculars. She didn't know why she did this. Maybe just to feel connected to it, but then one night, she noticed something. A fire on the rooftop of the school. It was there for a while, then it disappeared. The next day she thought that she had been seeing things, but she went the next night to try and prove herself wrong, but she saw it again. She started watching every day when the fire was lit. She didn't know who it was, but she remembered something Namra had said when they were all gathered on the roof. I hope one day we can all sit around a fire together. That stuck with her as time passed and things changed. The guards got fewer and fewer, even the way the guards acted started to change with time. Onjo watched as the soldiers loosened their restrictions, and sooner rather than later she found a way that she could sneak out of the camp into the infected zone. Nobody really knew anything that happened in here, as the military had sent teams upon teams into the zone. Word around the camp was they were doing clearance missions and gathering that their losses had reduced each time they went. She knew they had succeeded in killing strays, but that also brought a thought to her mind, because Namra could have been killed, but she held out hope. She saw the fire every night. Before they knew it, 4 months had passed. Na-Yeon ate her food before Onjo walked into the tent. Hey Na-Yeon, are you doing okay? Yay, I'm doing fine. The little one is not causing any problems today, she said as she got up. Na-Yeon was now showing, and her parents had warmed to the idea of already becoming grandparents, even if they wanted it to come at a later date. Originally, her mother had especially stepped into a new light, trying to make up for all the years she hadn't really been there for Na-Yeon. So what's the plan for today? Na-Yeon asked as she dressed before walking out with Onjo next to her. Martial law had been ended and most of the military had moved out, with only some soldiers remaining to guard the camp, Soo-hyuk said as he walked up with a muffin in hand. He looked like he wanted to hand it to Onjo, but changed at the last second to give it to Na-Yeon. Sorry, but she's eating for two, he said with a small laugh, and Onjo punched him in the arm. Oh Soo-hyuk, I wanted to speak with you about something. Could we meet up later? Onjo said. Soo-hyuk didn't really know what this was about, but agreed nonetheless. Sure. They stood awkwardly for a bit, and Na-Yeon knew she had to excuse herself. You two can't talk now, I'll go get something to eat. Onjo wanted to stop her, but Na-Yeon just waved her off before giving her a wink and thumbs up and turned to leave. Onjo and Soo-hyuk looked at each other oddly before she signaled for him to follow her into the tent. Na-Yeon hadn't really left, as she thought that Onjo was finally going to confess to Soo-hyuk and she wanted to be there for her friend, which still felt like a weird thought, but she wanted to be there for her regardless of the answer. She knew how Onjo got in one of her slumps. She waited just out of sight of the tent with a small smile on her face as she listened in. It seemed as if they were whispering, but she caught small glimpses of it. It wasn't a confession, but Onjo telling Soo-hyuk that she thought someone was at the school and she was going to go. Na-Yeon stepped back. She needed to clear her head because that couldn't be true. She must have misheard. Otherwise Onjo would have told her. She went through the motions of the day with only the words from Onjo weighing on her mind. Later in the evening, Onjo had got all of the equipment ready and was headed to the spot she said she would meet up with Soo-hyuk and head to the school. But as she turned the corner, she was met with the sight of Hyo-rung, Dae-soo, Mi-jin, Soo-hyuk and more importantly Na-Yeon. "What are you all doing here?" "I only said tell someone, not everyone," she asked as if they didn't catch her in her lie. Soo-hyuk scratched the back of his head nervously with a smile. "I did only tell one person," he said sheepishly. She let out a sigh as she made eye contact with Na-Yeon, someone who definitely couldn't be here. "Na-Yeon, you know what we are doing. You should go back to your tent and rest. This could be dangerous." "And how did you even find out?" Na-Yeon just scoffed. "Then make sure to watch my back because I'm coming or I'm going to go alone when you leave, and you would rather watch my back, wouldn't you?" she said, knowing damn well that they wouldn't want her roaming the infected zone, pregnant and alone, even if the army said no infected had been seen in months since the clearance missions. "And how I found out? Well, let's just say Dae-soo has a big mouth," she said with her head held high. She knew she wasn't going to let them know that she held from her first, but when Dae-soo had blurted it out during the day talking to Mi-jin, she knew she had an easy scapegoat. "My mouth's not that big," Dae-soo said before Mi-jin smacked the back of his head. "Idiot." Onjo was surprised Mi-jin was there because she really wasn't part of their group, but she knew she most likely was doing it because she was bored, or her going off about her being a senior and having to watch out for the juniors. "Fine, let's go, but stay close," Onjo said with her eyes especially directed at Na-Yeon. They managed to scale the wall easily with the group especially helping Na-Yeon get up and down it. They all had their weapons at the ready. Even if the soldiers had said they cleared the zombies out, they were not going to take the chance. Na-Yeon was placed at the center of the group with the rest of the others forming a shield around her. They walked for a while. It had gotten dark and they needed torches to light the way, but even so, there was an eerie quiet to the place without even the sound of any critter. There was still ash remaining from the army's bombing runs, but there was nothing else till they walked up to a shrine. It was a shrine built up with gifts and other various items, and Onjo quickly answered when she saw the questioning looks from the others. "I don't think I was the only one sneaking out here. I guess others wanted to remember their families. I started it, and not long after I saw people also started to leave things here," she said as she flashed her light over it and then moved past it. The group quickly followed. She was searching the forest for a while till the flash of her torch landed on a ribbon in a tree. Everyone stopped, the surprise clear on their faces when they saw the items, which looked like new. "I found them after the first few times I came in here. Like someone was trying to guide us to them," she said as she flashed over the ribbon to another one in the distance attached to a tree. "What if it's a trap?" Soo-hyuk asked. Onjo had thought about that, but she had lost everything and she was willing to glance and whatever string she could. "It could be, that's why I only wanted to go alone before I told you." The glares she got from the others didn't help settle her guilt, but she was right in her thinking. She knew that, so they followed the ribbons through the forest, the city, and the destroyed sections of the school littered with ash and rumble till they saw another heading inside the school. This was it. Whether it was a trap or not they would find out now. Onjo signaled to Soo-hyuk towards Na-Yeon and he nodded back at her. She hoped if anything went wrong he would get her out of here fast. They followed the ribbons, passing by halls and classrooms, all in an eerie silence. They half expected something to jump out at them with the way they had their white-knuckled grip on their weapons. The ribbons lead them up and up till they found themselves at the door, and Onjo nodded at the others before opening it ready to swing. There was no one there that she could see. But there was a fire burning brightly. The rest of the group exited the staircase with Soo-hyuk standing in front of Na-Yeon just in case. "I didn't know if you would come," a familiar voice said, walking out of the darkness behind one of the vents on the roof. Everyone focused as she walked out into the light and were surprised to see Namra looking fine and well standing in front of them. Soo-hyuk, Dae-soo, Anjo and Hyo-ryung rushed towards her, enveloping her in a hug. The group's hugs continued as Na-Yeon cautiously approached. Namra glanced at her and brought out her hand. Na-Yeon somehow joined the group hug as Mi-jin watched on. They broke apart, everyone with ecstatic glances. "I hope you saved some for me," a much deeper voice spoke, leaving the shadows, and Na-Yeon knew that voice from anyway. She had it encouraging her since the day she lost him. Whenever she doubted herself, it was always there. "Cheong-san," she said weakly as he walked out. Na-Yeon didn't know that she could move so fast in her life as she rushed at him, nearly tackling him to the ground in her hug. Anjo was right there with her, and after the others were sure they weren't dreaming, had rushed to embrace him. "How are you? How are you alive?" Na-Yeon gripped him so tight that she could swear she would break his bones. "After I left, I had some time," Namra started. "I had time to learn to balance my hunger. It took me some time, and with nothing else to do I went searching and found him buried under all those bodies." Na-Yeon couldn't believe it. He was there and they had just left him, but it was Anjo that interrupted. "But we checked, there wasn't anyone alive down there." Namra just shook her head. "We were looking at it wrongly and were short on time. I had time to be thorough." Namra looked back at the fire, Soo-hyuk's hand never having left hers since they embraced. "When I found him I didn't even recognize him. I didn't even think he was alive because he was so burnt beyond repair, but with time and my powers and the ones I found he had too, he began to heal. It took a long time and I waited with him patiently." Everyone had just stood aside as Na-Yeon kept her tight hold on Cheong-san, because in her mind if she let him go now he would disappear again. "Yay, sorry it took so long. So how has it been going with guys?" Cheong-san asked, facing Na-Yeon, who had her face still buried against his chest and arms wrapped tightly around him. "Nothing much really," Anjo said, her voice a little lighter. With one more family member regained, her spirits were higher than she thought. "Well, if you mean nothing, then," Dae-soo started before he was punched in the side by Mi-jin, who nodded at Na-Yeon. That seemed to shut him up but also spur Cheong-san curiosity as his arms wrapped around Na-Yeon. "You really missed me, didn't you?" he asked, even already knowing we both did, she replied, which confused him for a moment. Then he thought she meant her and Anjo as she glanced up at him with a smile and teary eyes. She held his hand, removing it from around her, and laced her fingers with his before guiding it down. The smile on Na-Yeon's face faltered for only a moment, thinking what if he didn't want her, want them? She shook that off. She would deal with it if that came. Cheong-san's hand reached down to her stomach and he immediately felt the difference. His enhanced senses had told him that Na-Yeon smelled different from how he remembered, but it couldn't be what he thought. Right, he really hadn't gotten a good look at her before she rushed to him, but she was wearing a large oversized sweater that seemed to hide her figure, and now he knew why. "Wah-wah-ha?" He didn't know how to get his voice out. "Looks like I win." Dae-soo pay up, Mi-jin said as the whole group turned to see Dae-soo handing Mi-jin chocolate bars. But that was beside the point as Cheong-san focused his look back on Na-Yeon, who looked so nervous as if she would break depending on what he said next. "I'm pregnant." It felt like a shell shock to Cheong-san and he froze as he thought back to their night together. A day admitted that he had thought about a lot. He must have taken too long or looked the wrong way because Na-Yeon wanted to pull away and he quickly rushed to hold her in his embrace. "Mine?" he asked, trying and failing to hide the hope in his voice. She nodded at him with a small hopeful smile. He glanced at Anjo and she smiled at him with a nod, and instantly he locked his lips with Na-Yeon. He had just been happy to see that she had made it out okay, but now finding out this was just the icing on the cake after all the past months of hardship. He laid his hand to her stomach again, slipping under her shirt, and just held it there. It took some focus, but he heard it. The heartbeat was clear and loud thanks to his now enhanced senses. The others decided to start catching up with Namra so that they could leave the two alone. No doubt they had a lot to speak about. Cheong-san took in as he listened closely to the heartbeat of their baby. Just thinking about that was throwing him off as he felt Na-Yeon run her fingers through his hair. "I thought we lost you. Why didn't you try talking to us?" Na-Yeon asked, her voice somewhat choked. He looked up at he and could already feel the guilt building. It had been weighing on him how he couldn't see Na-Yeon and Anjo, but now he had a baby he had been keeping away from too. "I wanted to. More than anything. But it wasn't safe for us to," he said as he glanced over at Namra talking to the others. He stood up, bringing her into his embrace. "I didn't know." She knew what he meant. "It's okay, you couldn't have known." "I didn't know till not too long ago too," she said with a small smile. Na-Yeon was just happy that he was taking this so well. She had thought it might have gone another way if she had ever saw him. And even as that hope faded with each passing day, she thought he was dead. The two hugged each other tightly, swaying softly with Cheong-san's hand never leaving Na-Yeon's stomach. He felt the heaviness in his heart as he remembered his mom and dad teasing him about girls and him having his own family when he was older. It hurt that he knew they would never get to see her, or the baby. He held her a bit tighter, burying his face in her hair. "I wish Mom could see this," he said, causing Na-Yeon to look up at him. She knew how important his parents were to him, especially with everything she had learned from Anjo about him and his family. "I wish they were too, but they would probably kill us," she said, causing him to burst out laughing. "Yay, I can already see her chasing me around with her rolling pin while Dad just laughs." Na-Yeon was happy she could get him smiling because she could only guess what he and Namra had been through in here alone and hunted by the army. "Cheong-san," Namra said, breaking their reverie, "it's time to go. The others are waiting for us." Na-Yeon quickly held him tighter. "What do you mean go?" she asked, looking at the two. Namra gave a small shrug and looked at Suhyuk, and then Cheong-san will wait for you to catch up, she said as she burst into a run and jumped off the side of the roof. "Namra!" the group shouted as they rushed to the edge, but Cheong-san wasn't really worried, letting out a sigh. "She's gotten so dramatic these days." Cheong-san walked towards the end with the others as they stared in awe at the people watching out of the shadows. "Namra found others like us when we were stuck here. We were able to save some before the army got to them. Others weren't so lucky." Na-Yeon tightly held onto his hand and he noticed how she was letting small shakes through her hands. "Namra, I think I will take the scenic route," Cheong-san said down to her. She was nervous about that but knew he probably wanted to spend time with the others, especially with Na-Yeon. Namra gave a thumbs up. "Remember to take a show, Na-Yeon," she said sheepishly, causing Na-Yeon's face to turn red. Cheong-san turned to the rest of the group. "Let's want you guys back," he said, leading the way with Na-Yeon holding his hand. The group started on their way back to the camp with everyone bombarding Cheong-san with questions, but he seemed to shower Na-Yeon with his own. Na-Yeon was more than happy to keep answering them as he wanted to know everything that had happened since he left the group all those months ago. Anjo made sure to stick close to him to tell him everything that had happened. Time seemed to fly by as everyone was just talking about everything, and before they knew it they were by the camp wall. Everyone stood around silently, not knowing what to say. "Come on guys, you know I'm here and I know you're here. So I'll see you soon." That seemed to put everyone at ease as they each went to give him a hug before climbing the wall and jumping over. Anjo was the last to give him a hug but climbed the wall and waited on the other side with some of the others. Na-Yeon easily slipped into Cheong-san's hold as they just stood together silently, Please don't leave yet, she asked, clutching him fiercely. I have to go. The others are waiting for me. He put his finger under her chin and tipped her head till she faced him. Don't worry, I will be close. If you need me. The both of you, he said, placing his hand on her stomach again. His group rarely ever went close to the camp because of how guarded it used to be, and the other times they did the soldiers had been ruthless, but deep down Cheong-san knew he didn't want to leave, not yet. He had seen her for so long, could he risk it? He could see her eyes searching his, her arms wrapped around him. The answer is easy. I guess the others could miss me for one night, he said, glancing around to make sure that there were no soldiers roaming around. He saw the light return to her eyes as her face broke into a smile. It was pitch black, but he could see her clear as day. Let's get you to bed, he said as he glanced at the wall. Should be an easy climb, he said, and got a punch in the shoulder from Na-Yeon. You're going to help. Getting back over the wall was easy with Cheong-san's super strength. The rest of the group was surprised as they saw the two appear over the wall. They had been waiting to help Na-Yeon over the wall after Cheong-san left. They were surprised when, after Na-Yeon came up, they saw Cheong-san appear next to her. He gave a small laugh to their surprised faces before giving a shrug. I guess I'm sleeping over tonight, he said as he carried Na-Yeon down the wall. Cheong-san knew that he probably couldn't stay long and he had to leave soon in case someone found him. The group gave each small goodbyes before everyone dispersed. Na-Yeon, with her hand holding Cheong-san's, led him to her tent, making sure to keep out of sight. They made it to their tent easily, but not without Cheong-san telling her when to duck, as he could hear things she couldn't. Cheong-san looked around her tent. It was modest with a lot of stuff, even a picture of her with Anjo and another with her sitting by some benches with the group eating. I'm happy that you got close with the others, he said, directing her attention to the pictures by her bedside. Na-Yeon looked at the pictures with a small somber smile on her face. It took a lot. The little one was a lot of help, she said, and he could tell from the momentary sadness on her face that it must have not been easy. Speaking of photos, we should take one, she said as she went to check on her drawer for the camera her parents had bought and sent to her. After diving into her clothes for a bit, she pulled out her camera before pointing him towards the bed. He sat down and she immediately sat down next to him, throwing his arm around her shoulders as she tried to angle the shot. Cheong-san could only stare at her as she tried to get the perfect angle, because there it was, that smile that he had thought about. Okay, 1, 2, and before she could get to 3 he turned her head and gave he a kiss. The flash and noise from the camera going unnoticed by the both of them. She could only stare at him with a smile as he brushed her hair. You need to get some sleep, it's pretty late. Okay, old man, she said jokingly, but she knew she was tired even with all the adrenaline of seeing him wearing off. The doctor had told her to rest lots, and she was surprised that Anjo hadn't burst in and told her to sleep like she usually did, but she could guess why. Okay, she said as they both laid down on her small cot, wrapping the blankets around her. Normally she would think her cot was too big for her alone even with the little one, but it had been the doctor's orders. But with Cheong-san here, it was perfect as she pressed into his side, wrapping her arms and legs around him as she settled into his embrace. She wanted to savor this old feeling more, but she was so tired, and before she knew it, she had fallen asleep. Cheong-san heard her breathing ease out as he just stared at the roof of the tent before he slowly closed his eyes. When Na-Yeon woke up the next morning, she felt around her cot but couldn't feel a presence next to her. She shot up fast because yesterday couldn't have been a dream, right? She was about to start stressing till she saw who she was looking for sitting by the end of the cot. Cheong-san was just staring at an ultrasound picture with the most inquisitive eyes, as if the picture told him everything there was. Cheong-san, he heard her say, and turned to face her with a small smile. Na-Yeon knew then, that everything was going to be alright, especially with him by her side. Morning beautiful.